"Get out of here! You don't belong in this room!" The words cracked through the silence like a whip. A white manager sneered, waving his hand as if brushing away dirt, while the black cleaning lady froze in place, clutching her mop like it was her only shield. Around her, polished shoes clicked, expensive suits shuffled. Everyone watching, no one helping. What he didn't know was that in just minutes, the balance of power would shift. Tell us in comments, what would you do if this was you? It was a quiet morning in the glass towers of one of the city's biggest companies, the kind of place where the walls gleamed, the floors shined, and everyone carried themselves with an air of untouchable importance. Hidden among them was a woman most people barely noticed. Angela, the cleaning lady. She came in every day before sunrise, dressed in her faded blue uniform, carrying the tools that kept the building spotless for the executives who never once asked her name. To them, she was invisible, just another background figure in their polished world. Angela had worked in that building for years, raising 2 kids on her own, often skipping meals so they wouldn't have to. Despite the exhaustion, she carried herself with quiet dignity. She took pride in her work, even if no one else did. While others rushed to their meetings and power lunches, she scrubbed coffee stains from the boardroom table, emptied trash bins overflowing with crumpled papers, and polished the very floors those same people walked across without ever thinking of her. But what most didn't know was that Angela wasn't just a cleaner. She had a story, one that would shatter every assumption made about her. She had connections that reached higher than anyone in that building could imagine, but she never used them, never boasted, never demanded respect. She simply did her job, until the day she couldn't ignore the humiliation any longer. That morning, as she entered the executive floor with her cart, she felt eyes on her, cold, dismissive stares that made her skin prickle. Something was different. Something was about to happen. And when it did, it would change the entire company forever. If you were in Angela's shoes, working hard every day only to be treated like you didn't belong, what would you do? Before we continue, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Angela was finishing up in the grand boardroom, the one lined with marble floors and glass walls that stretched from ceiling to floor. It was the kind of space reserved only for top executives, where decisions worth millions were made every week. She moved quietly, placing chairs back in line, wiping fingerprints from the glossy table, when the sound of sharp footsteps echoed behind her. The manager, Mr. Collins, stormed in. His suit was tailored, his tie a bold red, and his expression carried the arrogance of someone who believed this floor belonged to him alone. His eyes narrowed when he saw Angela. Without hesitation, he barked at her to leave, accusing her of disrupting serious business. The room froze, his words slicing through the air, but no one spoke up. Some smirked, others looked away, all pretending not to see the humiliation unfolding. Angela lowered her head, not out of shame, but to hide the storm building inside her. This wasn't the first time. For months, Collins had singled her out, mocking her uniform, dismissing her presence, even telling her once that people like her should be grateful to scrub floors. Each insult was a bruise, but she swallowed them, choosing silence over conflict. Yet today, something was different. As Collins strutted closer, he knocked over her mop bucket, sending dirty water spilling across the polished floor. Laughter rippled from a few onlookers. Angela felt her hands tremble, but she stood still, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. Inside, memories of sacrifices, the double shifts, the nights spent hungry, the times she watched her children sleep while she cleaned offices, ignited a fire she could no longer contain. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply stared back at Collins, her silence louder than any insult he had thrown her way. And in that moment, something unshakable began to form, a shift so powerful that none of them, especially Collins, could see it coming. Because What Collins didn't know was that Angela wasn't just a cleaning lady. She had the power to change his life, his career, and everything he thought he controlled. And the countdown to that moment had already begun. Would you have stayed quiet like Angela all this time? Or would you have fought back sooner? Collins thought he had won. He smirked as Angela bent down to gather the bucket, muttering something about how people like her should know their place. The executives in the room chuckled nervously, some shifting in their seats, unwilling to challenge the display of cruelty. To them, it was easier to let the insult hang in the air than to risk crossing the man who signed their paychecks. But Angela didn't flinch. She stood slowly, her back straight, her eyes calm but unyielding. In that silence, the atmosphere in the room shifted, subtle but undeniable. And then, with the simplest of gestures, she reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and made a call. Her voice was steady, almost casual, as if she were confirming a lunch order. But every word carried weight. The room hushed. The executives who had laughed a moment ago now exchanged uneasy glances. Collins rolled his eyes, dismissing her, but something in her composure unsettled him. It wasn't defiance. It was certainty. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't intimidated. She was in control, and he couldn't understand why. Minutes later, the door swung open. A hush spread through the room as the CEO of the entire corporation walked in. A woman whose authority made even the boldest executives straighten in their seats. And when her eyes landed on Angela, they softened. She crossed the room, embraced her, and addressed her not as a cleaner, but as someone far more important. Collins's smirk faded. His jaw tightened. Beads of sweat formed at his temple as he realized he had humiliated the one person whose voice could reach higher than his own. The whispers began among the executives, confusion, shock, and the dawning awareness that the power they thought Collins had was crumbling before their eyes. Angela said nothing. She didn't need to. Every second of silence made Collins's authority shrink, until finally the CEO turned to him, her face stone cold. And in that instant, Collins understood. His career, his reputation, everything he had built on arrogance and cruelty was hanging by a thread. What do you think happened next? Was Collins fired on the spot, or did Angela's silence deliver an even greater blow? The boardroom, once a place of Collins's dominance, now felt like a courtroom with every gaze locked on him. The CEO's voice cut through the tension, calm but razor-sharp as she demanded an explanation. Collins stammered, his usual confidence evaporating. For the first time, he wasn't the predator. He was the prey. The silence that followed his excuses only made his downfall more brutal. Angela remained still, her hands folded in front of her, watching the man who had ridiculed her unravel before the very people he once ruled over. And then it happened. The CEO didn't just fire him. She did it publicly, stripping him of his authority in front of the entire board. His ID badge was collected, his chair pulled away, and his legacy reduced to whispers of shame echoing in the room. For Angela, the moment was more than vindication, it was justice. Every insult, every cruel smirk, every dismissal of her humanity had led to this reckoning. She hadn't needed to shout, hadn't needed to fight. Her dignity had spoken louder than any words, but the impact didn't stop there. The executives, who had once turned away in silence, suddenly saw her differently. Some lowered their heads, ashamed of their complicity. Others offered her quiet nods of respect. Angela, the woman they had overlooked for years, had just changed the balance of power with a single call. That day became a story whispered across the company, a lesson in humility and humanity. Angela walked out of the boardroom with the same calm steps she had walked in with. But she carried something more, a quiet triumph, a reminder that true strength isn't always loud. And for Collins, his name became a warning, a symbol of what happens when arrogance blinds you to the worth of others. So the question remains, how many times will it take for people to learn that power doesn't come from titles or suits, but from respect? Tell us in the comments, what lesson do you think Angela taught that day?